Hello there and welcome to my latest Vladimir guide. For those of you who don't know, I'm a Vladimir main who peaked Master 111 LP in Season 12. On top of that, I coach people in League of Legends to help them climb the ranked ladder, so if you're interested in that, the link will be in the description down below. Now, since I'm a Vladimir OTP, I've coached a lot of Vladimir players, and I always hear the same story. It goes something like this. One day I had to play against Vladimir and he completely destroyed me and my teammates, and it felt like we didn't have counterplay at all. But then I played him myself and for some reason it didn't click. I couldn't carry my games with him. On the contrary, my win rate with Vladimir was worse compared to my win rate with previous champion pools. That's something I hear all the time. Now, if you're someone who can relate with this story, or maybe you want to reach your full potential with Vladimir, then this video is for you, because I came up with a solution for all your problems. People tend to struggle with Vladimir because they don't completely understand how he works, what type of champion he is, what his specific strengths and weaknesses are, and so on. Most Vladimir players basically lack a fundamental game plan. Even though every single game is different, if you play Vladimir, you should always know what to do and when to do it to a fundamental understanding in each and every game. After all, you're always playing the same champion, so a lot of what you will do in your next game will be the same as in your previous game. And for most people, that is a big problem. Most people don't have a specific way of playing Vlad that they can just copy-paste. No, every single game they try different stuff and they don't have a fundamental game plan to follow. This video is going to fix that, because I'm literally going to give you the game plan that you should be using to optimally play Vladimir. At the end of this video, I will show you a clear and efficient game plan that you can read every single time before you go into game. That way you should always know what to do and when to do it when playing Vladimir. So if you want to, you can immediately fast forward this video to the full game plan that you can use to climb optimally when playing Vladimir. Now, I wouldn't recommend that, because that way you're going to miss out on a lot of valuable information. Because not only am I going to give you the game plan, I'm also going to explain every single part of it. That way you will understand the game plan, and if you understand it, you will adopt it a lot faster, and you might even add things on top of it to keep improving it and make it future-proof so that this game plan still upholds 3 seasons from now. Alright, let's start with creating this game plan. The first thing we should do is think about what defines Vladimir. Vladimir is a scaling god. Scaling basically means that Vladimir is weak in the early game but becomes strong towards the later stages of the game. So if the goal is to scale, that means the goal is to reach mid/late game. That means we should secure our weak early game by avoiding fights so that we can get to mid/late game without being behind and preferably being ahead. Now, in order to truly understand a champion, it can be very useful to think of ways to counter that champion. So before we move on, let's talk about how to counter Vladimir. That way, when we're playing Vladimir, we'll know what we have to be careful of. Since Vladimir will be strong in the late game no matter what, if we plan on countering him, it's in our best interest to delay his power spikes as much as possible by getting him behind in the early game. Let's say we're playing mid lane versus a Vladimir. Then we have 2 main options of getting him behind in early game. First of all, we can get Vlad behind by poking him a lot and bullying him so that he cannot walk up to farm the minions, and maybe on top of that we can look to try and kill him. Now, there's also a second option. Instead of bullying Vlad, we can just push in the waves, keep him stuck underneath his turret, and then we roam onto the map to get ourselves and our teammates ahead. That way we can snowball the game and potentially end it before Vlad becomes too strong. Think of champions like Twisted Fate, Galio, Aurelion Sol, and so on. These are champions that are really good at the second option. That brings us to Vladimir's 2 fundamentals that you absolutely need to fulfill every single game if you're planning on consistently climbing with him. The first fundamental is don't die in lane. If we die in lane, we become weaker, which means we will be able to farm less and have less skill pressure, and thus we will stall our power spikes, which is extremely bad. Now, how do we make sure that we survive the laning phase? Well, we do this by minimizing trading and fighting with our lane opponent, and we use jungle tracking to avoid dying to the enemy jungler. Alright, so the second fundamental is prevent your lane opponent from roaming. You need to try to keep your lane opponent in lane as much as possible so that they don't snowball the game by impacting the map, because that way the enemy team might end the game before you have scaled. You can keep your lane opponent in lane by trading with them and just keeping them interested in you. If you see that your lane opponent wants to roam onto the map, don't be afraid to use Ghost, Ult, Pull, whatever you need to keep them in lane. Once again, more on this topic further into the game plan. Alright, so we mentioned that Vladimir's goal is to scale. How do we consistently scale or consistently get to mid/late game? Well, we do this by prioritizing CS in the early game and in the mid game. So what does prioritizing CS mean? It means that we don't trade with the enemy if it means we have to miss a last hit for it. Now even if we do that, we still have a big problem. How do we get high CS numbers if almost every single mid laner out there can bully us in the early game? Well, I came up with 3 fixes for this. Alright, fix number 1. We try to farm as close as possible to our mid lane turret. That way, people can't run you down or gank you as easily. Also, your jungler will be more likely to gank you because the enemy mid laner will have to overextend constantly to farm minions. Alright, now how do we keep the wave close to our turret? Well, we simply let the enemy push towards us, and then instead of letting the wave crash under our turret, we simply hold the wave in front of our turret. So we basically freeze the wave. Now obviously in order to do this, we need to be somewhat strong, we can't just do this if we are getting stomped. If the enemy doesn't want to push towards us, there's something else we can try. We can try to push in the wave under the enemy turret, and that way the wave will automatically push back to our side of the lane, and then we can hold the wave in front of our turret as well. Alright, fix number 2 to make sure we have good CS is basically just abusing external factors such as similar spells, builds, runes, etc. If you struggle in lane because for example you're playing against a control mage like Victor who can poke you all the time, don't be afraid to start with a Doran shield and go with second wind in your runes. That way you will have more sustain and thus be able to stay longer in lane and thus farm more minions. You can also go teleport in hard matchups to make sure you get as much farm as possible. And it even goes as far as this. Sometimes, for example, into Sylas or Katarina, I like to pick a more aggressive rune and summoner spell setup, like Ares, Scorch plus Ghost Ignite, just to help me have more pressure in lane so that I can walk up more confidently and get more last hits on the minions. Also, rushing Fiendish Codex in hard matchups can help you with sustain and thus help you with farming better. Alright, the third and last fix to get good CS numbers is a bit more of an advanced tip. Another way to get lane priority in order to farm more is by being very aggressive early on, and then you suddenly stop with trading and start spamming Qs on the minion wave to heal up. Once you healed a good amount of HP, you can start trading again, and if you repeat this process you will outsustain a lot of champions. That way you will dominate the early laning phase and thus you'll be in a better position to get as many minions as possible. Now this trick only works against people who don't go teleport obviously. Alright, so that's basically what we do from level 1 to 5. We focus on last hitting the minions and avoid fighting. We do this by keeping the wave as close as possible to our turret, using external factors like summoner spells, runes and items, and if necessary we can use the trading mechanism that I mentioned before. Once we reach level 6, we should still do all of these things, but we also start becoming stronger and we even have kill pressure with ult. So from level 6 on, till the end of the laning phase, which should be somewhere around 15 to 20 minutes, we still keep doing everything we did from level 1 to 5, but we also think of additional opportunities now that we have ult. In my eyes, getting ult on Vladimir mainly helps you with the following 3 things. Number 1. We start having kill pressure on most champions. We can be more aggressive with walking up for empowered Qs, hitting E's, etc. This means we should still keep the wave as close as possible to our turret, but this time it's not only to farm safely, but this also gives us more room to run our lane opponent down with our ultimate. Number 2, our ultimate also helps us to push in waves so that we gain tempo on the map, create better wave states and deny the enemy mid laner more CS. And last but not least, number 3. Our ultimate is also an extra tool for trading to prevent our opponent from roaming. If our opponent shows signs that he wants to roam on the map, we should walk up and keep him interested by starting to fight him, for example. Our ultimate is going to help us to get our lane opponent low, and if he's low, he obviously won't roam anymore. So don't be afraid to use stuff like Ghost, Ultimate and Pull to prevent your lane opponent from roaming. Now, why is it so important to keep your opponents from roaming? If you farm 1v1 for 20 minutes in a row with your lane opponent, you will almost always outscale your lane opponent and be stronger than them because you're playing Vladimir. So if your lane opponent can't kill you, he's going to look for alternative ways to get a lead over you, for example by roaming. If you keep your lane opponent in lane, he's screwed, because he can't kill you and he can't roam, so now there's no way for him to counter your scaling potential. Alright, what do we do once the laning phase is done? This is what I like to call mid-game. So mid-game basically begins at the end of the laning phase all the way until 25/30 minutes into the game. Everything past 25/30 minutes is late game in my eyes. Alright, so how do we play Vladimir in the mid-game? Since the laning phase typically ends at around 15/20 minutes, we're still not strong enough to 1v9 and win the game. So we need to scale more, which means we need to farm more. And the best way to farm more once the laning phase is done is by side laning. That way we get solo gold and solo XP. So when everybody is grouping, we basically position ourselves in either bot or top lane to get ourselves a hit by getting solo gold and solo XP. Now how do we side lane as Vladimir? We push in the waves all the way to the enemy's turret and then we don't attack the enemy turret, instead we move on to the map. Vlad isn't good at taking turrets. If you wanted to take turrets, we should play Fiora. So what are we going to do if we play Vlad in the side lane? We're just going to push the waves and then move onto the map and hover our teammates while the wave is pushing back towards our turret. Alright, now that we know how to side lane and when to side lane, all that's left for us to know is where to side lane. How do we know when to side lane bot or when to side lane top? It's actually very simple. If you don't have teleport, you side lane in the lane that is closest to the next spawning objective. That could either be Baron or Drake. For example, if Baron is up and you don't have teleport, you should side lane top lane, because that way when a Baron fight breaks out, you can still join relatively quickly. But if you were to farm bot lane in this scenario, then you would have to walk all the way from bot lane through the river, through mid, just to get to the Baron fight. But by that time, the fight might already be over. If you have teleport, you should be side laning on the opposite side of the next spawning objective, because this allows you to put pressure on the opposite side of the map while still being able to join a potential fight because you can use teleport to get there. Alright, that basically covers mid game. Now what do we do at the end of the mid game or at the beginning of the late game? Well, for the main part of the mid game, we side lane to become stronger, right? Now that we're at the end of the mid game or at the start of the late game, we should be strong, which means we shouldn't keep side laning. Once we have a significant level and item lead, we should force a Drake or Baron fight so that we can start closing the game. We should win that Drake or Baron fight because we are stronger than everyone else in the game. So we either force a fight to end the game or we force a fight to take an objective like Baron that will help us end the game. Now even if you're strong, you will have to play it correctly to make sure you win the mid-game/late game team fights. So how do we approach fights like this? Well, we try to one-shot the high-value targets on the enemy team, such as a fat Caitlyn or a fat Fiddlesticks or maybe a fat Syndra, you get the idea. Now how do we do that? If we just try to run at a fat Caitlyn, she might actually kill us before we can get onto her. So preferably we try to flank the enemy backline. Use tools like control wards and oracle lens to play around vision and catch enemies off guard. Arriving early to an important objective will help you a lot with this. For example, if the Baron is the next objective to spawn, make sure to get there at least 30 seconds before it spawns, that way you create some time for yourself to clear out enemy vision and think of good spots to hide. Alright, that covers the entire fundamental Vladimir game plan. Obviously, this is not an all-inclusive game plan. There's a lot of information that I had to leave out, otherwise the game plan would become unclear and hard to understand. And obviously the entire idea of this fundamental game plan is that we always have something to fall back on and that we always know what to do, even if it's not 100% the most optimal play. I can consistently climb to diamond by sticking 100% to this game plan. In order to climb further, I add some exceptions and new concepts to this. So I want you to view this Vladimir game plan as a blueprint to get to diamond and a fundamental basis that you can add layers to if you're looking to climb to higher elos. Alright, with all that being said, I want to thank you for watching this video. Feel free to leave a like and subscribe, and hopefully I'll catch you in my next video. Bye.